Welcome to a journey unlike any other. Tonight, you'll walk beside a traveler named Christian, a man with a burden on his back and a longing for something greater than the world he knows. Through valleys and shadows, hills and hope, he follows a narrow road toward the celestial city. Let your heart rest and your thoughts drift like a gentle breeze, for this is more than a story. It's a reflection of our own journey, our struggles, our faith, and our hope. You are listening to The Pilgrim's Journey, a peaceful walk to the celestial city. Let the story begin. While Catholic and Protestant princes and peoples fought each other on the continent, a movement of the strictly Protestant and Republican Party began in England against the state church, which still retained much of its Catholic character, and against the arbitrary rule of the king. We will see the waves of these ecclesiastical and political storms also battering Bunyan's little ship of life in the following. The revolution and its consequences are reflected, in a sense, in the storms of his inner and outer life. John Bunyan was the son of very poor parents. His father, Thomas Bunyan, was a traveling tinker and pansmith, but lived in a shabby hut in the village of Elstow, not far from the city of Bedford, in the heart of England. His mother, Margaret Una E. Bentley, also came from Elstow. Nothing further has been preserved about his brothers. John did not receive a careful upbringing. However, the son gratefully acknowledges that his parents sent him to school in Bedford so that he could learn to read and write and later assist his father in his trade. Otherwise, he grew up in the exuberance and rudeness of an unruly youth, where what he had learned in school was soon forgotten. During this time, he seems to have been not only the seduced but also the ringleader of his peers in all the crazy pranks, such as orchard robbery and poaching, which brought him public punishment. He himself describes p. 6 his life at that time with the following words: "As for my natural life, it was at that time when I lived without God in the world. Indeed, according to the course of this world, and according to the Spirit who at this time has his work in the children of unbelief. It was my joy to be captive of the devil to do his will. I was full of all unrighteousness, which also worked so powerfully both in my heart and life, that from my childhood up I had few like me in cursing, swearing, lying, and blaspheming the holy name of God. Yet even during this time of greatest distance from God, his religious feelings had not entirely died within him, and his sins still caused him remorse. As early as his 10th year, he was tormented by frightening dreams and thoughts of the torments of hell. These images often disturbed him so much in the midst of his games and among his friends that he became completely depressed. However, he never changed his mind. On the contrary, he sought to numb these impressions and indulge himself even more in his pleasures. He himself says how he related to the Word of God during this time. During these days, thoughts of spiritual things were very distressing to me. I could not bear it myself, nor could I bear that others entertained them. When I saw people reading Christian books, I felt in their company as if I were in a prison. God did not fail to provide protections that should have awakened him from his slumber. Twice he came close to drowning, once in the river Ouse near Bedford, the other time in a bay. In his recklessness, he one day struck an adder that was slipping across his path. As it was now stunned, he tore open its jaws with his stick and pried out its fangs with his bare hands. without sustaining any injury. This act of God's mercy made little impression on him at the time, but it awakened in him the feeling that he was not completely abandoned by God. At about 17 years of age, he enlisted as a soldier and apparently served in the parliamentary army, which was fighting against Charles I of the Stuart line during the siege of Leicester. He apparently once again experienced the protective hand of God. One day, he was to stand sentry at a dangerous spot when P7, a comrade, begged him to take his place, and shortly after his replacement, he was killed by a bullet. But even this miraculous preservation of his life left young Bunyan indifferent and cold at the time. Soon afterward, he left the army and returned to his homeland without changing his life in the slightest, and gradually fell into abject poverty. Around this time, when he was about 20 years old, he married on the advice of his friends, who believed this change would have a positive effect on his previous lifestyle. His wife was a poor orphan girl, so poor that she brought him nothing in the way of worldly goods except a bowl and a spoon. However, she also owned 2 books, The Common Man's Footpath to Heaven and The Exercises in Godliness, which her pious father had left her upon his death. He would read these 2 books with her from time to time, and found many things in them that pleased him. His wife also often told him about her pious father, and how he had rebuked vice both in his house and among his neighbors, and warned others against it, and how holy and righteous he had been in word and deed. These books and his wife's admonitions had such a profound effect on his heart that he strove to observe at least the outward observances of religion. Therefore, he went to church twice on Sundays and was able to sing and pray devoutly, just like the others. But as soon as the service was over, the games on the lawn once again fully absorbed him. As always, he was the first among the merry fellows at the dances and games. A sermon on Sunday observance and Sunday desecration struck a more emphatic note in his conscience. It seemed to him as if the clergyman had preached against him. Never before had he felt so clearly what the guilt of sin is. He left the sermon with a heavy burden on his mind. But this impression too soon passed and was replaced by his old frivolity. That same day he was startled out of it, for a voice from heaven seemed to call to him, "Will you leave your sins and go to heaven, or will you keep your sins and go to hell?" Extremely astonished by this, he looked up to heaven, P8, and as he himself reports, it seemed to him as if the Lord Jesus were looking down upon him with great displeasure. But Bunyan closed his eyes to the light, and after concluding that his time of grace was over, he resolved to continue to enjoy the happiness of this world and the pleasures of sin to the fullest. So, about a month later, we find him cursing and swearing at a neighbor's window. This woman, who herself had a bad reputation, rebuked him severely, saying he cursed so horribly that she trembled to listen to him. He was the most ungodly curser she had ever seen in her life, and that he would corrupt all the youth of the village. What many sermons had failed to achieve, this woman's rebuke achieved. Deeply ashamed, he cast his eyes down. He wished he were a little child again, that his father could teach him to speak without cursing. From that time on, he stopped cursing. Soon afterward, he met a pious man who pointed him to the Holy Scriptures. Bunyan now began to read the Bible, in which he was primarily interested in the historical aspects, whereas the apostolic epistles, for example, were still a book with 7 seals to his understanding. So he truly began to improve his life and live according to God's commandments. And he was sorry when he hadn't done so. He was even able to gradually give up dancing, his favorite pastime. In this way, he calmed himself down and believed he was pleasing God. The change in Bunyan's life also caught the attention of his neighbors. They considered him a truly pious man. This opinion flattered him, and he was proud of his piety. While Bunyan was living in this self-satisfied and self-righteous spirit, his calling took him one day to Bedford. There, in one of the streets of that town, he saw 3 or 4 women talking about divine things. He, who liked to chatter about religious things, but probably also driven by an unconscious need, approached these women to listen. They spoke of the work of God in their hearts, of the new birth, and how they had been convinced of their natural misery. They told each other how the Lord had visited their souls, with what words of comfort and promises he had refreshed them. They also told what temptations, P9, of the devil they had experienced, and how they had survived his attacks. They spoke of the little faith and sinful nature still in their hearts, of the tendency towards self-righteousness, which they rejected as inadequate and impure. These were, of course, unknown things to our Bunyan, but a thorn remained in his heart. He became aware that, for all his supposed and well-intentioned piety, the necessity of being born again had never occurred to him, and that he neither P10 knew nothing of the consolation of God or of the deceitfulness of his own heart. He went back to his business. The words of those women touched his heart so deeply because they not only convinced him that he lacked the characteristics of a truly pious person, but because he recognized how blessed the state of one who possessed them must be. He therefore felt the need to redirect his steps there, and the more he did so, the clearer he became about his true state of mind. He now read the Bible with real avidity. In particular, the letters of the Apostle Paul became the subject of his most diligent research. The primary goal he strove for was the salvation of his soul. His mind was so earnestly directed toward this that neither pleasures, nor advantages, nor persuasion, nor threats could distract him from it. It was precisely during this time of searching for light and truth that he found himself in great danger. By coming into contact with members of a sect called the Ranters, who believed themselves to be above all law and commandment and preached the freedom of the flesh. But God preserved him in his fear and did not allow him to accept such seductive principles. Despite his earnest searching and prayer, about 2 more years passed before he finally found peace. However, it would take too long to recount in detail all the struggles and temptations he had to endure. Fears arose within him regarding the election of grace, or that the day of salvation might already be past for him. A misunderstanding of certain Bible passages and blasphemous inspiration from the evil enemy tormented and confused him so much that at times he seemed to be in a state of despair once again. It was those noble women who lovingly embraced him and connected him with their pastor, John Gifford, the Baptist preacher in Bedford. Gifford himself had been led down a similar path of sin, error, and painful struggles, and had finally found peace. This made him all the more the man who could understand Bunyan and serve as his counselor. He reveals to us in his Pilgrim's Progress what he owed to this faithful witness. In addition to God, where he paired the evangelist with the Christian, Wayfarer as his counselor and guide, p. 11. Yet another means served to uplift him. Bunyan had a desire to read the experience of some godly man of the past. God provided that, after some time, a book by Martin Luther came into his hands. It was his explanation of the epistle to the Galatians. Bunyan found in this book his own situation and experience treated so fully and thoroughly as if it had been written from his heart. He found that Luther treated very seriously temptations and their origins, temptations to hopelessness, blasphemy, etc., and showed how the law of Moses, as well as the devil, death, and hell, had a hand in them. This book seemed to him, next to Holy Scripture, the most appropriate for a tempted human being. Despite all this, he was still not free from his severe temptations. And although, for a time, he felt the peace of God in his heart, it soon became like a turbulent sea again. But finally, all this passed, and the Sun of Righteousness rose in his soul. Now the shackles truly fell from his feet. He was freed from his affliction and chains. His temptations also disappeared. Now he went his way rejoicing in the grace and love of God. Soon after, he joined the Baptist congregation in Bedford. This was around the year 1653, when he was about 25 years old. Around this time, Bunyan's outward progress also improved. He was no longer in danger of being considered a gypsy, but soon enjoyed great respect among his fellow citizens. He still lived in his thatched cottage in Elstow, where God had blessed him with 2 children, Mary, his blind daughter, whom he loved dearly, and Elizabeth, one in 1650 and the other in 1654. In John Gifford, he had a kindred spirit, an insightful teacher, which was good, for his spiritual struggles had not yet reached their full end. Spiritual and physical temptations continually assailed him. Meanwhile, the confidence of his faith finally prevailed. The congregation soon realized that Bunyan had gifts that would bless his fellow men, and they appointed him their deacon, or caretaker of the poor. Not long afterward, he was appointed by the congregation P12 preacher or evangelist. With his assumption of this office, 1655, he also moved to Bedford. But Bunyan expressed how little he thought of himself at that time in the following words: "I could not at first believe that it was possible that God should speak through me to the heart of a man." In the early days of his ministry, he spoke mainly of the corruption and curse of sin. He was all the better at this because the terrors of the law and the guilt of sin still weighed heavily on his conscience. He himself confesses, "I can say with truth and without dissimulation that when I went to preach, I went full of guilt and terror, even to the pulpit door, and only then was the burden lifted from me, so that I was free in mind until I had fulfilled my ministry." He continued in this way for about 2 years. After that, he was filled with lasting comfort and peace. Therefore, he no longer preached so much about the horrors of sin and the law, but sought to portray Jesus Christ in the riches of his redeeming power and in his blessings. "For I always preached what I had experienced." Later, he became particularly convinced of the mystery of union with Christ, and therefore he also explained this part of the evangelical truth to his listeners. His reputation as a preacher soon spread to the surrounding villages, so that hundreds flocked from all directions to hear him. At the same time, he diligently pursued his trade as a tinker, and was often on the move for this purpose. He preached wherever the opportunity presented itself, in forests, barns, or on lawns, and occasionally even in a church. The following example shows us the power emanating from his sermon. One day he was to preach in a village church near Cambridge. Under Cromwell's protectorate, even Baptists were allowed to use public churches. A large crowd had already gathered in the churchyard. A student rode past. He saw the crowd and asked what was going on. He was told that the people wanted to hear a certain Bunyan, a tinker, preach. This interested the student. He dismounts, gives a boy 6 kreutzers to hold the horse for him, and says that he must also listen to the tinker's washing, which would be a delightful joke. He goes into the P13 church, but the word of God from the tinker's mouth so moved the young student that from then on he took every opportunity to hear Bunyan, and later became a blessed preacher of the gospel. For 5 years, Bunyan had worked as a lay preacher. Under the rule of Oliver Cromwell and his son Richard, it was no danger for him as a Baptist to preach, although he did experience the hostility of some clergymen who, with bitter envy, looked contemptuously upon the new, zealous preacher, P14 looked down on them, and in turn did not lack slander of the blackest kind. This period also marked the beginning of his literary career. However, his first booklet, Illumination of Some Evangelical Truths, led him to long disputes with the Quakers, who had also settled in Bedford. On May 29, 1660, Charles II, who had fled to France after the beheading of his father, the ill-fated Charles I, returned to London as king. While still in exile in Breda, Holland, he had issued a proclamation to the English people, promising that weak and tender consciences shall have full liberty in the practice of religion, and that no one shall be disturbed or reproved for religious opinions differing from those of the established church, provided they do not disturb the peace of the realm. But the hopes of religious freedom that some may have placed in the restoration of the monarchy were not fulfilled. The old penal laws against all who did not adhere to the Episcopal Church were reinstated. Indeed, they were even made more severe and augmented by new ones. Thus, Baptist meetings could only take place in secret, often at night and in remote locations. John Bunyan, too, continued his blessed work with great faithfulness. Once, to avoid detection, he is said to have disguised himself as a carter, wearing a white coat and carrying a whip, and traveled to a village to preach the gospel in a remote barn. For a time, Bunyan and his friends eluded the watchful eye of the police dot. At the beginning of October 1660, the authorities assembled in Bedford issued an order that the liturgy of the Church of England must be read at public worship. Bunyan, not being a member of the church, did not consider that this decree applied to him. He was far from obeying it. Then a traitor appeared and reported him to the government. It was on November 12th, when he had been requested to preach in the neighboring village of Cele, and he was about to speak on the subject, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" John 9:35. A neighboring justice of the peace had already heard of the meeting that was to be held there. P15 Bunyan's friends, who heard this, advised him to seize the opportunity and escape. But Bunyan thought, "If I flee, what will my weak-minded brethren say? Will they not also flee? Will they not say that I preached mere words to them without works?" So he was determined to stay and fulfill his duties. But no sooner had the service begun than the bailiffs entered with the warrant for his arrest. At his request, Bunyan was allowed to address the congregation for a few more words, and then he was taken to Bedford Prison. The quarterly sessions of the court took place in January 1661. The charges then drawn up against Bunyan and read to him read that John Bunyan of Bedford, a farmer, has for some time been fiendishly and perniciously abstaining from public worship, and has been an unlawful assembler to the great division and destruction of the good subjects of this kingdom, contrary to the law of our sovereign Lord and King, etc. The questioning revolved around the obligation to attend state church services, the English liturgy, and Bunyan's authority to preach. The accused admitted that he had held meetings to pray and exhort, but firmly refused to make the promise that P16, if set free, he would no longer preach. The judge pressed him with all sorts of arguments to persuade him, but to no avail. "Well then," said the judge, "hear your sentence. You must go back to your prison and remain there for another 3 months. And then, if you refuse to go to church, i.e., the Episcopal State Church, and attend its services, as well as to cease preaching, you face banishment from the country. And if you should then show yourself in the country again without the king's special permission, you will be in trouble." Bunyan replied, "I have nothing more to say. If I were to get out of prison today, I would preach the gospel again tomorrow, with God's help." After the 3 months, Bunyan was now very anxious to learn what would become of him. He had already prepared the sermon he intended to deliver before the assembled people at his execution. However, it never came to that, nor did they dare to send him into exile, but he was held captive for 12 years. The prison stood on the bridge that led over the river at Bedford. It was an inhospitable dwelling, a place which Bunyan himself calls a cave at the beginning of the Christian's pilgrimage. But this very prison became, through Bunyan, a house of exhortation and consolation. Besides him, many others were imprisoned there for their faith, and he did not fail to instruct them and pray with them. In addition to his fellow prisoners, many others came from all over the surrounding area to visit him and seek spiritual advice from him in their doubts and various questions of conscience. Although his imprisonment was not harsh, the separation from his second wife and 4 children weighed particularly heavily on him. His first wife had died after a serious illness before his arrest. Unable to earn a living through his craft, he learned to crochet braids and make cords and braids, which he was allowed to sell at the prison door, often accompanied by his beloved blind daughter. He also used the silence of his cell to immerse himself completely in the word and spirit of the Holy Scriptures. From here his most important writings emerged: his poetic prison reflections, his poems entitled Exuberant P. 17, his biography, The Grace of Grace, his Confession of Faith, and especially The Christian's Pilgrim's Progress, have this origin. Many other books were written by Bunyan during his imprisonment, and all his literary works together comprise no fewer than 60 volumes. In this way, he was able to achieve a much greater impact as a prisoner than he had previously been able to exert. Through his preaching in his freedom, the Lord also gave him such favor in the eyes of the jailer, P18, that the latter allowed him a great deal of freedom for a time. He was allowed to stay with his family and sometimes even preach in the surrounding villages and forests. It is said that many of the Baptist congregations in the Bedford area owe their existence to his midnight sermons at that time. In 1666, after being set free for a short time, he made it to London. But one day, just as he was about to hold a meeting, he was again arrested as an opponent of the established church and returned to stricter custody. This severity gradually eased, so that for months he was able to regularly attend the meetings of his brothers in Bedford. Indeed, in October 1671, while still in prison, he was even elected preacher of the Baptist Church in Bedford. His frequent absences, however, came to the attention of the clergy who were persecuting him. An official was dispatched from London to Bedford to ascertain the truth of these rumors. In the middle of the night, he reported to the jailer to make his examination. That same night, Bunyan was with his family, but was so restless that he could not sleep, and therefore told his wife he must return immediately. He did so, and the jailer was very displeased that he returned at such an inconvenient time. Shortly afterward, the officer appeared and asked, "Are all the prisoners well kept?" "Yes." "Is John Bunyan in his cell?" "Yes, I wish to see him." He was summoned, appeared, and all was well. After the officer had left the jail, the jailer said to Bunyan, "You may go out when you please, for you know better when you must come back than I can tell you." Finally, in 1672, Charles II issued the so-called Act of Indulgence, which granted the dissenters release from prison and toleration for their private meetings. The exact circumstances to which Bunyan owed his freedom have only recently become known. In the Battle of Worcester, in which the Scottish army was almost wiped out by Cromwell and Charles II, then still pretender to the throne, was in personal danger. He finally found a man who, after a 40-day flight, carried him on his shoulders into a boat. This man was a Quaker. 20 years later, this Quaker appeared before the king, who immediately, Pete 19, recognized him and expressed his surprise that he had never come to him for a reward. The Quaker remembered the thousands of his fellow believers languishing in prison and prayed for them, not only for them, but also for others persecuted for their conscience. Bunyan's name was also mentioned. Charles II, who, for all his faults, had a grateful heart, issued an ordinance by which the imprisoned dissenters, who had not committed any political offenses, were set free. This ordinance was dated March 15, 1672. When Bunyan left Bedford prison, he was 44 years old. One of his first acts after his release was to petition the authorities for unhindered preaching and free meeting places in Bedford County and the neighboring counties. Thanks to his efforts, 25 preachers owed their employment, and 31 meeting places their uninterrupted use. As a pastor, he tirelessly followed up with individuals, holding edifying meetings here and there. His pen was soon back in full activity, and he wrote works for which his memory remains blessed. In general, he sought to promote the kingdom of Christ as much as he could, and from the Baptist congregations in his area, of which he was now the de facto leader, he received the honorary name Bishop Bunyan. This bishop did not consider it beneath his dignity to continue his former craft until the end of his life. He also remained in his modest dwelling. His study was barely larger than his prison cell. A shed behind the house served as his workshop. Bunyan's reputation grew steadily. He also came to London once a year on his traveling sermons. There, his sermons were so highly regarded that more than 1,200 people attended a morning service at 7 a.m. on a weekday in midwinter. Another time, on a Sunday, more than 3,000 people had gathered. Many had to turn back due to lack of space. Among those who flocked to his sermons were the high and the low, the learned and the unlearned. The famous theologian Dr. John Owen, who had already been held in high esteem under Cromwell, liked to sit at the feet of the unlearned but eloquent tinker whenever he had the opportunity to listen to his fervent, heart-rending p. 22 listen to speeches. When King Charles II heard this, he asked the learned doctor how a man of his high education and great learning could condescend to listen to a tinker preach. Owen replied, "Your Royal Majesty, if I could have the tinker's gift of preaching, I would gladly exchange all my learning for it." Bunyan was asked more than once to settle permanently in the cosmopolitan city, but neither the prospect of a larger field of work, nor, much less, a higher income could persuade him to leave his Bedford community. Year after year, the old enemies stirred again. Indeed, they even managed to get Bunyan imprisoned once more, but this time only for 6 months. Through the intervention of respected men such as Dr. Owen, the famous chaplain Cromwell, and the Bishop of Lincoln, he was released. Whether Bunyan wrote the first part of his Pilgrim's Progress during this or the 12 years of his imprisonment is uncertain. It was not published until 1678, while the second part appeared 7 years later. At the beginning of 1685, in 1682, Bunyan's congregation in Bedford again suffered much persecution. For a time, they were expelled from their meeting house and forced to meet in the open air. It was in the same year that he published his excellent little book, The Holy War, in which he attempted to symbolically depict the Christian struggle against sin, the world, and the devil. When, after the death of Charles II, February 3, 1685, King James II, who sought to restore the Protestant Church of England to Catholicism by force, ascended the throne, the persecutions again became particularly fierce. Bunyan often only narrowly escaped extreme danger to his life. He was closely guarded by his enemies everywhere, but this time the Lord rescued him from all danger, except that here and there wild mobs broke into his house and robbed him of some of his hard-earned possessions. At the beginning of 1688, was struck by a severe illness, but recovered sufficiently to be able to accomplish a special act of love, which, however, was to be his last on earth. One of his friends, who lived in the town of Reading, had threatened to disinherit his own son, and his end was already approaching. Without p. 21, a reconciliation between father and son had been achieved. The son was very distressed and asked Bunyan to intercede on his behalf with his father and bring about a reconciliation. The faithful servant of God willingly undertook the long journey to Reading on horseback and succeeded in restoring the love between father and son. He then rode back to London. On the way alone, he was caught in heavy rain and soaked through. He arrived at a friend's house in London, frozen and stiff with the wet. There, he preached on Sunday, August 19th, but by Tuesday he was struck with a severe fever. 10 days later, on August 31st, 1688, this faithful witness of his Lord was allowed to enter the rest of the people of God after an eventful life. His last words were, "Do not weep for me, but for yourselves. I am going to the Father of our Lord, Jesus Christ, who, although I am a great sinner, will receive me through the mediation of his beloved Son. There, I hope, we shall soon meet again, p. 22, to sing the new song and be blessed forever and ever. He was in his 60th year. Of him, too, it can rightly be said, "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord. They rest from their labors, and their works follow them." Revelation 14:13. His remains were interred in the Finsbury Cemetery, Bunhill Churchyard, where Watt, Owen, and Wesley also rest. A dignified monument bearing his image still marks his grave. And through the pilgrimage that lies ahead, he still speaks to us, though he is dead. I was wandering through the wilderness of this world. I came to a place where there was a cave. I lay down there to sleep, and as I slept, I had a dream. Behold, I saw a man standing in a certain place, clothed in filth and torn, with his face turned away from his house, with a book in his hand and a heavy burden on his back. I looked and saw that he opened the book and was reading it. As he read, he wept and trembled, and being unable to contain himself any longer, he cried out in anguish, "What shall I do?" Acts 2:37, 9-6. In this state, he returned home and tried to hide his heart's anguish from his family for as long as possible. But he could not remain silent for long. "My dear wife, and you, my dear children, I am lost, for a heavy burden rests upon me. Moreover, it has also been reported to me with certainty that fire from heaven will consume this city of ours." To Peter 3-7. "Wife, and you, my sweet children, will perish miserably unless we find a way of salvation in time." By this speech, his followers were greatly dismayed, not because they believed that what he said was true, but p. 26, because they thought crazy thoughts had entered his head. As night was falling, and they hoped that sleep would bring him back to himself, they urged him to rest. But the night was as restless for him as the day. Instead of sleeping, he spent it sighing and crying. When his family asked him in the morning how he was, he replied, "Ah, it only gets worse, worse, and worse," and began to talk to them again as he had the day before. But he found no one listening. Thinking he could dispel his anguish with a harsh and sullen demeanor, they mocked him and called him a fool. Then again, they took no notice of him at all. He therefore withdrew to his little room to pray fervently for them and to lament his own misery. He also sometimes went out into the fields and read or prayed, spending several days in this way. So one day I saw him walking through the field, reading his book, as was his wont, while he cried out in deep sorrow as before, "What shall I do to be saved?" Acts 16:30. I also saw that he looked now this way, now that, as if he wanted to run away. However, he remained standing, uncertain, as it seemed to me, which way to go. I then saw a man named Evangelist approach him and ask him why he was shouting so loudly. "Ah, Lord," he replied, "I see from the book in my hand that I am condemned to die and then to appear before the court." Hebrews 9:27. "And now I find that I am neither willing for the first nor fit for the other." Then the evangelist said, "Why are you not willing to die, since this life is accompanied by so many evils and torments?" "Because I fear," answered the man, "that the burden on my back will press me even lower than the grave, nay, will plunge me into hell, and, Lord, if I am not even fit to go to prison, I shall be even less fit to appear before the judge and endure the execution of punishment. P. 27. If that's how you are, said the evangelist, why do you stay here? Ah, he replied, I don't know where to turn. The evangelist then gave him a piece of paper on which was written, Flee from the wrath to come. Matthew 3-7. The man read these words and, looking anxiously at the evangelist, asked, Where shall I flee then? The evangelist pointed with his finger across a very wide field and said, Do you see that small, narrow gate there? No, answered the man. Do you not see that shining light either? Asked the other. He said, Well, the evangelist continued, Now keep your eyes on that light and go straight toward it, and you will soon find the gate. When you knock there, you will be told what to do next. I then saw that the man began to run, but when he passed near his house and his wife and children saw him, they called after him to turn back. But he stopped his ears and ran on, crying out, Life, life, eternal life. He did not even look behind him, but hurried straight across the plain. Now the neighbors also came, and when they saw him running like that, some mocked him, others threatened him, and a few shouted at him to return. Among these people were two who decided to run after him and bring him back by force. One was called Stubborn, the other Willing. The man was already a good distance ahead of them, but since they had decided to chase him, they carried out their plan and caught up with him in a short time. Then the man said, Dear neighbors, why are you following me? They replied, To persuade you to come back with us. But he answered, That cannot happen under any circumstances. You live, P28, in the city of destruction, which is also my birthplace. But I know for sure that if you die there, be it sooner or later, you will sink deeper than the grave, into a place that burns with fire and brimstone. Therefore, do not hesitate for long, dear neighbors, and come with me. Stubborn, what do you say? We should go with you and turn our backs on all our friends and pleasures. Yes, replied Christian, for that was his name, because everything you are about to leave is not worth comparing with the least of what I have in store for you. If you are willing to follow me, you will also have all these things in the same way, for where I go, there is no lack, but plenty. Come, and you will find that I have spoken truly. Stubborn, what goods are you actually seeking, and for whose sake you leave the whole world to obtain them? Christian, in heaven, 1 Peter 1-4, which will surely be the property of those who earnestly seek it. Here is a book. See for yourselves, if you will. Stubborn, oh, go away with your book. Do you want to come back with us or not? Willig, and let us go home without him. There is a kind of perverse mind that once it has formed a crazy idea, considers itself wiser than 7 moral instructors. Prov. 26 minutes and 16 seconds. Willing, don't treat this matter so lightly, my friend. If it is, as the good Christian says, then the goods he seeks are better than those we possess. I am therefore willing to go with my neighbor. Stubborn, what are you saying? Another fool. I advise you to return with me. Who knows where this demented man will lead you? Return, return, and be wise, Christian. No, just join me, neighbor Willig. We will find all the good things I have told you about there, and much more glorious things besides. If you don't believe me, just read this book yourself, and see the truth of everything it says is confirmed by the blood of him who made it. Hebrews 9:17-22. Willing. Well then, neighbor Strigg, my decision is made. I will go with this good man, and his fate shall be mine. But My dear friend Christian, do you also know the way to the place we are trying to reach? We will receive further instructions about the way. Willing. Come then, my dear neighbor, let's go. So the two went together, stubborn, and I want to go home again, because I don't want to waste time with such crazy enthusiasts. Then, after Strigg had left, I saw in my dream that Christ and Willig were walking across the plain. The following conversation unfolded between them. Christ: well, dear neighbor, how are you? I'm glad you let yourself be persuaded to come with me. If Strigg had felt the power and terror of things that are still invisible, as I did, he wouldn't have turned his back on us so easily. Willing. Listen, neighbor Christian, since we are both here alone, please tell me further what kind of goods we are seeking and how we can attain them. Christ: these are heavenly goods, which can be better. P. 31. Understand it in the heart, then speak it with the tongue. But because you have such a great desire to know it, I will read it to you from my book. Willing. Do you believe that the words in your book are truly true? Christ: yes, certainly, for it comes from the one who cannot lie. Willing. Well, that's good. But what kind of goods are they? Christ: it is an everlasting kingdom in which we shall dwell forever, and an eternal life which we may inherit. Willing. That's delicious. And what else? Christ: the Son of Heaven. Willing. Oh, how wonderful. And what more? Christ: there will be no more mourning, nor crying, nor pain, for the King of this place will wipe away every tear from our eyes. Revelation 21:4. Willing. And what kind of company will we find there? Christ: we will be surrounded there by the seraphim and cherubim, such glorious creatures that our eyes will be dazzled at the sight of them. We will also gather there with thousands upon thousands who have all entered this place before us. There is not one among them who does evil anymore, but all walk in love and holiness. They walk in the light of the countenance of God and stand in His presence, enjoying His eternal favor. In a word, there we will see the elders with their golden crowns, Rev 4:4. The pure virgins with their golden harps, Rev 14:1-5. All the martyrs who, out of love for the Lord of that place, and for the sake of the truth, P. 32, were cut off from the world, burned at the stake, torn to pieces by wild beasts, and thrown into the depths of the sea. Heb 11:33-40. Now they are all blessed and clothed with immortality as with a garment. 2 Cor 5:2-4. Willing. It's already enchanting to hear of these things. But if these glories can truly be attained, how can we partake of them? Christ: this is what the Lord, the ruler of this land, has said in this book. And if we truly desire it, all this will be given to us by grace and freely. Willing. I'm glad to hear all this, my dear traveling companion. Come, let's speed up our pace. Christ: I cannot go as fast as I would like, because the burden on my back hinders me. Then I saw in my dream that after they had finished talking to each other, they came to a muddy swamp in the middle of the plain. And how, not paying attention, they both suddenly fell in. The name of the swamp was Despondency. After they had waded around in it for a while and were already covered in mud, Christian began to sink because of the burden on his back. Oh, neighbor Christ, cried Willig, where are you now? Christ replied, truly, I don't know. Willig became very angry and said to his companion in an angry tone, is this the happiness you have spoken to me so much about? If we have already had so much misfortune at the beginning of our journey, what more can we expect until we reach the end of our path? If I escape here with my life, then you may, for all I care, take possession of that beautiful land alone." And with this, he used all his strength once or twice, and p33, he thus worked himself out of the mud with great difficulty, on the side of the swamp closest to his house, and hurried away. Christ never saw him again. So now Christ lay alone in the swamp of despondency, tossing and turning. He worked with all his might to crawl out of the mire, toward the side facing away from his house and closest to the narrow gate, because of the heavy burden on his back. However, he didn't quite succeed in gaining solid ground. But in my dream, I saw a man named Advocate come to him and ask him what he was doing. "Lord," said Christ, "a man named Evangelist bade me go this way, and directed me to the narrow gate there, to escape the wrath to come. Now I have fallen in here on the way there. Assistance. Why didn't you pay attention to the footprints?" Christ replied, "I was so afraid that I took the nearest path and ended up in the swamp. Now then, give me your hand," said Advocate. Christ did so, and pulled him out. Then he placed him on firm ground, and told him to continue on his way. I myself then approached the man who had pulled him out, and said to him, "Sir, why is this swamp, which lies on the way from the city of perdition to that gate, not made passable, so that the poor travelers could reach it more safely?" He replied, "This swampy pool is a place that can never be cleared, for it is the drain into which the dregs and filth that arise from the knowledge of sin continually flow. Therefore it is also called the swamp of despondency. For when the sinner's eyes are opened to his lost state, many fears and many doubts and all kinds of anxious worries arise in his soul. These all flow together in this place, and that is the reason why this soil is so bad." p34. But it is not the king's will that this place should remain as it is. His workmen, under the direction of royal surveyors, have been busy for more than 1,900 years clearing this piece of land. "As far as I know," he said, "at least 20,000, even millions of cartloads of the best teachings from all ages and all parts of the kingdom have been brought here and filled to improve this place, if possible. The experts say that these are the best materials for giving the place a good foundation, but it is still the swamp of despondency and will remain so, even if they have done everything they can under the guidance of the lawgiver, good and safe. Footprints have been laid even through the middle of the pool. But at the time when this place is most prone to filth and evil fumes, which usually happens with the onset of a change in the weather, these footprints are barely visible, and even when they are noticed, people are often seized by dizziness and make missteps. The result is that they become very dirty. But the path is good once one has entered through the narrow gate. I then saw that Willig had meanwhile returned home, and that his neighbors soon visited him. Some called him a wise man for having turned back. Others called him a fool for having put himself in danger with Christ. But a few mocked him as a coward and said, "If we, like you, had once undertaken this daring venture, we certainly wouldn't have given up so quickly because of a few difficulties." So Willig sat quite meekly among them. Finally, however, he plucked up his courage, and they let him go, and began to vent their mockery on poor Christ, and to make fun of him behind his back. So much for Willig P. 35 as Christian continued his journey alone. He noticed someone in the distance, striding across the field toward him. They met just as each was about to cross the other's path. It was a man named Weltklug from the town of Fleshly Wisdom, a very large city located near the place where Christian came from. This man, whom Christian met, had already heard of him. Christ's departure from the town of perdition had caused a stir throughout the region and had become the talk of the town, not only in the town where he lived, but also in other places. Believing he recognized Christ in this heavily laden, bowed traveler, Mr. Weltklug addressed him thus: "Well, where shall we go, my friend, with this heavy burden?" Christ: "Yes, it is heavy as any poor creature has ever borne. And since you asked me, where, I will tell you that I am going toward that narrow gate, for there, as I have been taught, a way shall be shown me by which I can be freed from my heavy burden." Worldly wise, don't you have a wife and children? Christian: "Yes, but I am so burdened with this burden that I can no longer enjoy the joy I once had in them. I have a wife and children, but it seems to me as if I had none." 1 Corinthians 7:29. Worldly wisdom, will you follow me if I give you some advice? Christ: "I'd be happy to, if it's good, because good advice is exactly what I need." Worldly wisdom, so I advise you to free yourself from your burden immediately, for until you do, you will have no peace of heart, no joy in the blessings with which God has blessed you. Christ: "That's exactly what I'm seeking. I want to be free of this burden, but I can't do it myself, and no one in the entire region can free me from it. That's why I've taken the path to the narrow gate." Worldly wisdom, who showed you this path? Christian: "A noble, worthy man. His name, as I recall, is Evangelist." Worldly wise, curse him for his advice. There is no path in the whole wide world more difficult and dangerous than this one. You will find that if you continue to follow his advice, you have, I see, already experienced something of it, for I still see the traces of the mire of despondency on you. But this is only the beginning of the tribulations of this path that await those who walk it. Listen to me. I am older than you. On this path you are now walking, you will encounter nothing but discomfort, pain, hunger, nakedness, swords, lions, dragons, darkness, sin, short, death itself, and who knows what else. Many have testified that this is so. Since you still lack experience, you should listen to the advice of older men and not allow yourself to be seduced by a stranger. Christ, O Lord. This burden on my back is far more terrible to me than anything you have mentioned. Truly, whatever may happen to me, I shall not care, if only I can be free of this burden. Worldly wisdom, how did you come by this burden? Christ, by reading this book. Worldly wisdom, I knew it. You've had the same fate as other weak people who concern themselves with too lofty things and then fall into such a desperate state. Confusion drives these people, like you, to undertake such desperate adventures in order to achieve they don't even know what. Christian, I know well what I want, relief from my heavy burden. Worldly wisdom, but why do you seek relief on this path, which is evidently fraught with so many dangers, especially since I could instruct you, if you would only listen patiently, how to achieve what you desire without exposing yourself to the dangers you yourself run into on this path? Help is at hand. And moreover, I will add this: instead of trouble, you will find rest and peace and many friends. Christ, oh, please reveal this secret to me. Worldly wise, certainly. There in that city it is called decency, lives a gentleman named Legal, a very P37, an experienced and famous man who possesses the art of freeing people from burdens like yours. I can assure you that he has already done much good in this way. Indeed, he has the skill to heal even those who have suffered somewhat in the head from their burden. Go to him, and he will help you quickly. His house is barely a rifle shot from here, but if you don't find him at home, his son, Polite, is there, a courteous young man, just as skilled as the old man himself. There, I tell you, you can be freed from your burden. And if you then do not wish to return to your birthplace, I certainly would not advise you to do. You can bring your family to this city, where you can buy one of the empty houses for a reasonable price. The provisions there are also good and inexpensive, and what will make your stay even more pleasant is that you will be in good reputation and esteem among honorable neighbors. Christian pondered this speech for a while, but soon came to the conclusion, if what this gentleman says is true, then I would do best to follow his advice. So he asked, and which way leads me to this excellent man's house? Worldly wise, do you see that mountain there? Christ, yes, quite good. Worldly wise, that's where you must go. The first house you come to is his. Christian now turned away from his path and went to the house of the Lord, lawful, so that he might be helped there. But the nearer he came to the mountain, the higher it appeared to him. Indeed, enormous rocks hung so threateningly over the path that Christian, fearing they would collapse, dared not go any further. His burden now seemed more oppressive to him than when he was on his first path. Moreover, flames of fire broke out of the mountain so that Christian was afraid that he might be consumed by them. He trembled and trembled with fear, and remorse rose within him for having followed Mr. Worldly Clever's advice. As he stood there, he saw the evangelist P38. At the sight of him, he blushed. The evangelist came closer and closer, looked at him with an angry and serious expression, and began to speak to him. What are you doing here, Christ? Christ stood trembling before him, without saying a word. Are you not the man, continued the evangelist, whom I found standing in lamentation before the city's destruction? Christ, yes, Lord, I am. Evangelist, have I not shown you the way to the narrow gate? Christ, yes, dear sir. Evangelist, how come you deviated so soon? You're no longer on this path. Christ, as soon as I emerged from the swamp of despondency, I met a gentleman who persuaded me to turn toward the city that lay before me. He persuaded me that I would find a man there who could free me from my burden. Evangelist, what kind of man was that? Christ, he seemed to be a nobleman and persuaded me a great deal, finally persuading me to follow his advice. So I came here. But when I saw the mountain hanging over the path, I suddenly stopped, lest it should fall on my head. Evangelist, what did this gentleman say? Christ, he asked me where I was going, and I told him. Evangelist, what did he ask next? Christian, he asked if I had a family. I replied, yes, but I'm now so burdened with the burden I carry that I can no longer enjoy it like I used to.